Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you today. Beautiful Lord's Day, and a real privilege to be together to study during this time of Bible study. Thanks for being here to be a part of it. We're starting a new study today, and I hope you've picked up a copy of the lessons out on the table, a booklet entitled, Am I My Brother's Keeper? The author of these lessons is Bill Hall. Many of us know Bill Hall, and I don't know about you, but I would think if there's anybody I could imagine who could write a series of lessons to guide us in regards to how we should conduct ourselves toward one another, I would think Bill Hall would be a great person to come up with that approach. For those of us who know Bill Hall, and maybe you may know also his brother Sewell Hall, they're great people, just very humble and devoted servants of God. And so I just personally think that whatever he would have to say about what we ought to do, and especially in regards to how we relate to one another in the kingdom of Christ, I think it's got to be a worthwhile study. I have not been through all the lessons yet. I've looked at them all, but I haven't studied them all yet. But they just really, it looks like some things we need and will be very helpful to us as we relate to one another. So this first lesson, and we'll try to stay on track to do a lesson a week if we can. There's 12 lessons, and we'll try to cover one a week. This first lesson is placing my brother ahead of myself. That is not, just the very title of that suggests something that I think just almost naturally it's difficult for us to do that, because the first person I think of is me. I want to make sure everything's okay for me, take care of my issues, my interests, my concerns. What are you doing for me? That's the way we look. I think we're just sort of innately inclined in that direction. So we have to do more than what comes naturally to put our brother ahead of ourselves. What's naturally is to take care of myself.
It's not in our nature, Greg.
That's right. So like so many things about being a Christian, we're asked to go to a higher level. Not just do what's normal, what everybody does, take it to a higher level. And so this is that challenge, placing my brother ahead of myself. So let's look at some of these passages that Brother Hall suggests to us. Philippians chapter 2 is where he starts. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. So my relationship with my brethren is especially going to be affected by my humility of heart. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than himself. So, one of the reasons why I am inclined to be selfish is because I'm proud, right? Other people owe me. They should do this for me. I expect it from them because I have this high evaluation of myself, right? If I can get rid of that thinking and develop this lowliness of mind, esteem others better than myself, then I'm going to have, it's going to be a lot easier. It's going to be a lot easier to relate to people the way I should if I can rid myself of that element of pride. You guys join in here at any point, but I think this is the key. I actually probably think that is the key to our relationships with others, is less selfishness, greater humility. It's not all just about me. Monty?
The Bible teaches us to submit to each other. If I don't have the idea that my opinion is the most valuable one in the whole world and I'm the most important one around, it's a whole lot easier for me to submit to other people. But when I think that I'm the smartest one around and I'm superior to everybody else, I don't want to submit. Why should I? Because I'm better than they are.
Yeah, why should I submit to your opinion? Because my opinion's better than yours anyway. If I have that attitude, it's going to really make it hard. I think you're exactly right. So I think this starts out on a key point: lowliness of spirit, esteem others more than self. We have talked before about what I think is a very faulty psychological methodology that was promoted. I think it started being promoted probably, well, it was in the last half of the 1900s. It really became popular in the 70s and 80s, this self-esteem movement. And men, in their human philosophy, began to imagine that all of our problems were, if I've got problems, my problem is I don't have enough self-esteem. I need to elevate my self-esteem. I need to think more highly of myself. Well, of course, that's completely the opposite of what the Bible says. In passages like this, esteem others better than self. But human philosophy was telling us, get your own self-esteem up. What's interesting now is that even secular psychologists are abandoning that methodology. Even from just a worldly point of view, I've read articles where they say, that was a mistake. We were on the wrong track there. They're not doing that anymore. Well, if they'd been listening to the Bible all along, they never would have gone there. The Bible never suggests that our problem is low self-esteem. The Bible suggests just the opposite, that our real problem is thinking too highly of self. And what I need to do is think less of myself and think more of others. And this verse certainly teaches that. Monty?
When Samuel told Saul after his disobedience that when he was little in his own mind, I forget the exact phrasing, but he was better off and more highly esteemed by God when he was small in his own mind. But now that he got the big head over being king, really he got to the point he decided he'd do what he wanted to. It didn't matter what God said.
Good example. Perfect. Tom?
Abraham, Lot, approached Canaan. Abraham thought of Lot, he says, well, you choose where to go. He put Lot above himself. Here he was the one.
He should have had the choice. Yeah.
And then when, the Israelites were coming into Canaan and conquered Canaan, and they started asking for a king, God told them exactly what the king was going to do. And it was everything that, we're talking about, that pride and things, bringing things into himself and that sort of situation. So, there's that pattern all through the Bible.
Sure.
Really, at the very beginning.
Okay. Very good. Other thoughts, Jacob?
And verse 4 tells us how that's manifested is we're not self-absorbed. We're not just thinking about ourselves and our needs and desires. We're concerned about our brethren.
Yeah. I think that's a good observation and a pretty good test for us. So I think probably a good exercise would be take the church directory and go through the church directory and look at the different pictures and names. Do you know that person? Do you know anything about that person? Have you ever reached out to that person in any way whatsoever? And if you have to honestly say, no, I hadn't, then this expression, look not every man on his own things, but everything on the things of others. You're not looking to the things of your brethren, right? If you have to, you might as well be honest about that. No use being self-deceptive. If I can look through that directory and realize there's a whole bunch of people there, I don't know anything about them, then I'm not looking to them. I'm focusing more on self. Other thoughts, Dale? Okay. That's right. We should never be so impressed with our own status and knowledge and understanding that we can't learn from others. All right, question 2 takes us to a passage in Romans chapter 12, verse 10. Romans 12, verse 10 says in the King James, "Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor, preferring one another." And the question is to compare that expression, in honor, preferring one another, in other translations. I've got 4 here that I listed. The English Standard says, outdo one another in showing honor. The New International says, honor one another above yourselves. New King James says, in honor, giving preference to one another. New American Standard says, give preference to one another in honor. Probably of all those, and I don't know if anybody got another one they want to add in that mix. The one I thought probably registers easiest is that first one. The English Standard says, outdo one another in showing honor. That sort of puts it at a challenge level, doesn't it? I want to be the best at showing honor to others, rather than I want to be best at being honored. I want everybody to honor me. I want it to be so that I'm honored more than anybody else. No, this is, I want to be the best. I want to outdo others in showing honor to others. So that's a pretty good challenge, I think. Tom?
Yeah, we're talking about, going into a feast or whatever, and, taking the lowly place and, being, whoever's, the head of the feast or whatever, coming, no, don't sit back there, come up here.
Yeah.
And instead of going up front and then having to be told, no, that's reserved for somebody else.
Yeah, exactly right. I don't need to honor myself. I don't need to be worried about being honored by others. I need to be working hard to show honor to others. If we stop to realize, boy, this lowliness of spirit, this humility we're talking about, making it a point of emphasis to honor other people rather than expecting to be honored yourself. When you really think about it, we get so wrapped up in ourselves and our own lives and our own activities, and we think it's so important, when in reality, we're not making a very big difference in this world at all, if any. When we're dead, we'll very soon be forgotten. We're not making much of a lasting impression. There's nothing that we just don't have a basis for pride. Our lives, in the big picture of things, our lives are really not that important, pretty insignificant actually. So don't worry about heaping honor upon yourself or being interested in other people honoring you. Outdo one another in showing honor. I like that expression. Tom?
Used to, going back a few generations, parents taught their children how, respect. Older people were to be respected and honored. You went out of your way to do things. I can remember my parents encouraging us as kids, get up early and go clean the snow off, neighbor so-and-so's. She can't get out there and do it herself. And pretty soon they didn't have to get you up and tell you to do it. You just went and did it. And it was things like that. Now it's not very much. It's, the parents of our generation, this current generations have just neglected anything.
So there's a good point of emphasis for parents. Make sure that we teach these principles to our children. I think that's a good point. Monty?
When we think about wanting to be honored ourselves, if we learn to have that proper attitude about ourselves and really see ourselves where we are and look at ourselves the way God looks at us, we're lower than a snake's belly on a wagon track in the bottom of the ocean. We don't have anything that we need to be asking for praise for or anything like that. We're really bad off when you get right down to it.
Okay, good point. Dale?
Mary, I know a guy one time in the hospital. Every time you see him, I don't care if it's you or me or whoever, he's always yes. But his mom and dad, inspired him, really make an impression.
Show respect, right?
Everybody that I know that knows him, all say the same thing about him, how
Okay, good point. Question 3 says, what lesson was Jesus trying to teach the apostles in John 13, beginning verse 3? You know that passage. That's the foot washing passage, right? In John chapter 13. Now, in John 13, things are winding down quickly in the life of Jesus and very soon to be arrested and crucified. Toward the end of his involvement with his apostles, he did this act of washing their feet. And let's just look at the conclusion. You know how it unfolded there, and how Peter even objected and Jesus rebuked him basically. He said, verse 13, John 13, verse 13, ye call me Master and Lord, and ye say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that ye should do as I have done to you. Verily I say to you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither is he that is sent greater than he that sent him. If you know these things, happy are ye if you do them. We've talked before about how some of our religious neighbors have, I think, really mistakenly tried to apply this passage to the idea of a religious ceremony that they do in their worship services. Ceremonial foot washing. And I don't know, it's just a very simple reading of this text seems to clearly suggest that Jesus wasn't teaching a religious ceremony. He was teaching an act of humble service. We've studied this so many times before, but we remember that, back in those times, people walked everywhere they went. They wore sandals on dusty roads. Their feet were actually dirty. They needed their feet washed. And so, for instance, when someone came into your home, it was considered an act of graciousness to wash their feet, to serve them in that way. So Jesus here he's the Lord. He said, I'm your Lord and Master. You call me Lord and Master. You're right about that, he said. And if I have done this, I'm setting an example. He actually said, I'm giving you an example to follow. That is, if I humble myself to serve you in this needed way, then you ought to humble yourself to serve one another. And so Jesus wasn't teaching a religious ceremony here. He was teaching the humility of service. And we really need that. Today, not a great need for foot washing. But there's plenty of other acts of humble service that are needed, and we ought to be willing to do that. Again, if I think of others before self, if I'm humble not to think more highly of myself than I should, then this should be a natural. Well, I say natural. It doesn't come naturally. It should be something that we obviously pursue. It doesn't come naturally. We won't ever do that if we just do what comes naturally. But if we're willing to go challenge ourselves and do more than what just comes naturally, this is a pretty easy example to visualize. Tom?
We see the political opportunities sometimes, like, around Thanksgiving or whatever, maybe our president will go down to a local,
Food bank or something.
food bank or something.
Soup kitchen.
Or something, but it's all, sort of propaganda type thing. Where the thing that we're taught is you go do that in secret and you not let anybody find out about it.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. So I do something for someone else, but then I want to make sure everybody knows that I did this. So I talk it up so that what am I seeking there? I'm seeking the honor from others that we just talked about. That shouldn't be my focus. But if I do a humble act of service and then I want to publicize it to get credit for it, that kind of destroys the whole concept, doesn't it? As Tom.
The Samaritan and the Pharisee one, the publican, okay.
Publican, and the prayers, exactly right. Yeah. James?
You noted something a minute ago that initially something isn't natural to us. Usually the right thing to do might not be natural to us initially, but it can become a natural response if we do it right.
That's exactly right.
That's what God teaches us. It was natural for Jesus because of his nature of being God servant. And just because it at one point in our lives isn't natural response, it can be if we do it.
Exactly right. We can change what's natural to something different that's natural by continued practice. I think you're exactly right. So here's a guy who's right-handed, but he loses the use of his right hand. It was natural for him to be right-handed. By practice and constant use, he can learn to write left-handed. You can change what's natural in yourself by continued practice, and I think James makes a good point. It ought to become natural to us to look to the interest of others. It's not initially what we would do, but it can become more natural for us. And I think that you probably know people. We've got members here in this congregation that I would point out that I think are thus minded. They think they are. It is in their nature to think of other people and do acts of kindness for other people. And it's so commendable, and that's the way we need to be. Anybody else? All right.
Last 2 points sort of go in it, is kind of addition to each of it is like prejudice. Prejudice is something that we learn, but we do that sort of setting ourselves above others. We see that with the Jews, with the Samaritans. They were very prejudicial towards the Samaritans, and they actually looked at themselves as being better than them. And Jesus brought that out in these parables on several different situations. We have that sort of same tendency a little bit to go through and have our own personal prejudice influence the way that we look at others.
Okay. All right. All right. Let's look at question 4. References 1 Corinthians 12. And I would think before you even looked at that passage, you know that that's the rather long discourse that Paul has comparing the church to a physical body. And it's a longer passage, and we won't take time to read all of that here in class. I hope you've read it already. But let's just look at the end of that in verses 25 and 26. There should be no schism in the body. The members should have the same care one for another. And whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it, or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. Now ye are the body of Christ, and members in particular. That whole passage there, it sort of jumps off the page as something that you can easily visualize because you think of your own physical body. And so one member of the body gets injured or hurt or is dealing with. So I cut my little finger. It's just my little finger. It's not an important part of my body. No. I cut my little finger. My whole body jumps into response mode to care for the injury to what amounts to a minor, insignificant, not important. I could do without it. No, I don't. It's my body. It's a part of my body. And so I stop everything else. And I rush to resolving this cut on my little finger. Right? That's what physical bodies do. And Paul here, in such a simple concept, but certainly more challenging to apply, but that's the way we ought to feel about one another. Every member of the body, whoever they are, whatever their role is, whatever their position is, they're a part of the body. And we ought to have that kind of concern for them. I don't think we do. I don't think we do an excellent job of that. I believe we can do better, but that's a pretty easy thing to picture, isn't it, Tom?
Sometimes it needs to be pointed out that we're neglecting someplace. We look at the early church there, in Acts, where the Hellenistic widows were being neglected, and it had to be brought to the church's attention. They had to set aside people to go through and to correct that situation. A lot of times, we wait until the thing is already passed, and we can't do anything about it to react to it.
Yeah, I don't wait. That cut on my finger, I don't wait till gangrene sets in before I address the issue. I go immediately to take care of the issue. I think you're right. All right, anybody else? Dale? Yeah, you've heard those. There are true. More than once through the years, I've heard true stories of a situation where a person didn't show up at services, and that was so unusual. They immediately checked on that guy and found out that he was down at home and in dire straits. But his regular participation in the body had led them to say, if he's not here, there's something wrong, we better be checking. But that ought to be the case for every member, weak or strong. That ought to be the case. Bobby?
You know, Job said about his brethren, he said, my brethren have dealt deceitfully with me as a brook, and as a stream of brooks they pass away.
Well, that's...
Job had trouble out of his brethren.
Yeah. That's the downside of this. I mean, instead of this positive helping one another that we ought to do, we sometimes end up tearing one another down, which is a sad thing. Positively, we ought to view one another as members of the body. Let's look at question 5 in James chapter 3. James chapter 3, beginning verse 13. Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom. But if ye have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not, and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion in every evil work. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. All right. The question is, what is a wise and knowledgeable man encouraged to do? Verse 13. Who is a wise man endued with knowledge? Let him show out of a good conversation or manner of life. Remember, that's that King James word conversation, which means manner of life. Let him show out of a good manner of life his works with meekness and wisdom. And so, if you have any sense about you, if you have any understanding, if you're wise, you're going to be trying to demonstrate by what you do the right things. The wrong things, the attitudes that characterize the earthly, sensual, devilish wisdom, the wrong things are bitter envying, strife, glorying in self, lying against the truth. Verse 16, envying and strife. Where there's envying and strife, there's confusion and every evil work. So, when there is contention and strife unresolved, then we're not following God's wisdom as we should. Somebody's not, right? Now, I know that we all know that this is a two-way street, right? And so, doing everything as best you can. You can only work on your end of the equation, right? If the other person, sometimes I think we remember at the end of Romans 12, I forget what verse is right at the end of Romans 12, Paul said, if it be possible, live peaceably with all men. And even in that verse, it suggests sometimes, if there's strife and contention, it may not be my fault. It may be that the other guy is not trying. But as much as I'm able to try, then we try to resolve that. Live peaceably and so forth. That's following God's wisdom in the matter. The attitudes that characterize the wisdom from above are, verse 17, wisdom that is from above is first pure, peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. Man, there's several points there. And we could probably spend a lot of time talking about each of them. The ideas of being easy to be entreated, being merciful, being without partiality, not being hypocritical. That's a great challenge, isn't it? One of our problems in interpersonal relationships is I expect more out of you than I expect I have to give myself, right? So I'm not going to do it myself, but I expect you to do it. That's just raw hypocrisy, right? And we can't be that way and expect to have the kind of relationships with others that we should have. It's very easy. It's very easy to judge others, but be unwilling to apply the same standard to ourselves. We know very well Matthew chapter 7, the first verses of Matthew chapter 7, where it talks about the mote and the beam. You got a speck, your neighbor's got a speck in his eye, you got a board sticking out of your eye. And in your hypocrisy, you ignore the board sticking out of your own eye, you try to get the speck out of your neighbor's eye. Hypocrisy is a huge roadblock in our interpersonal relationships. But so many things there in that passage in James 3. Go to this, address this. Dale. Okay. And again, we should be practicing it. If we're going to expect it in others, we should let it be seen in ourselves. I think you're right about that. Other thoughts or comments here? All right. Question 6. List some situations in the service of the Lord in which I ought to place my brother ahead of myself. I don't know about you, but when I read that question, I had a real easy answer to that. In all situations, I ought to place my brother above myself, right? That's what this lesson is about, placing my brother ahead of myself. And you can't really imagine a situation, or maybe I'm missing something. Can you imagine any particular situation? Because that's the thing. List situations where I ought to put my brother ahead of myself. Well, turn that around. Give me a situation where I ought to think of myself above my brother. I can't imagine any, can you? Because that's what we're told to do. We go all the way back to the first question, Philippians 2, 3, and 4. In lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than himself. Look not every man on his own things, but also on the things of his brother. That's what this is all about, right? So in every kind of situation, I ought to place my brother ahead of myself. Wow, if we did that, if we really, really did that, it'd be a wonderful thing. I was talking to by email, and that's something we said. I didn't talk to this. I haven't actually talked to this guy in a long time, but I have email exchange. So had an email exchange with the preacher in another place, and he was saying that they're having some real congregational troubles, and he was asking, some people have left, and he was asking for prayers. And I wrote him back, and I said, there's no trouble like church trouble. And I really think that's the case, don't you? Church trouble is just awful. If we followed the kind of principles that are set forth in these scriptures that we're looking at this morning, we could significantly reduce having to deal with problems like that, which would be a wonderful thing. Now again, it's not all on you, and it's not all on me. If you're doing your part, but I'm not, then it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. But if you do your part, and I do my part, we ought to be able to have a good relationship. It's a challenge. It's not easy. We're not perfect, right? We're struggling, but you can't imagine a situation. Back to question 6. What are some of the situations in which I ought to put my brother ahead of myself? I just wrote one word there: in every situation. Monty.
As we think about, I've done my part. Well, a lot of times, maybe I did do my part, but I didn't do my part in a way to make it easy for you to do your part. So I can say, I've done what I was supposed to do, but over here, he fell off bad on this one. Well, if I'm having the right attitude, a lot of times we talk about in husband and wife relationships, that the husband's being the husband he ought to be, it's easy for the wife to submit. If I'm being the brother in Christ toward everyone else that I ought to be, when I'm doing my part, it makes it easier for them to do their part rather than a greater challenge.
I think you're right. So someone comes to you with criticism. You should do better. You could do better. You didn't handle that right. Our first reaction to that is to be defensive. I think that's sort of natural, sort of a defensive reaction. Whereas it's so much easier to acknowledge, well, you're right. I certainly could have handled that better. I'll try to do better in the future. That's a lot easier answer, and it's a lot more in line with what we're talking about here. We're not perfect. None of us are perfect. We do not relate to one another perfectly. We can do better. We ought to keep striving to do better. Tom?
One thing that does say is work out your own salvation, but even in working out your own salvation, you need help from others. There are others that have more wisdom and insight into the scriptures than you might, and in your working out, you need to go to them, and they need to work with you. So it's one step is you do have a responsibility to your own salvation. We're sort of individual on that aspect of it. If we neglect that, all the others just goes to.
If I was the only last Christian in the whole world, I'd still be responsible to God. But it sure makes it easier when I've got other people who can help me, as we do have, and we ought to be grateful for that. I think you're right. All right, question 7. What qualities of character will bring me to place my brother ahead of myself? That's really what we've been talking about all morning. And I would relate this back to the very first question about lowliness of mind and looking to the things of others. So certainly humility is fundamental, baseline characteristic that we need to work on. Because as we said at the start, that is not something that is innate in us. You think about a baby. A baby is totally consumed with self. Right? Feed me, I'm hungry. Change my diaper, or I'm going to yell my head off. I'm sleepy, I want a nap. You think about an infant, although we love them, they're so precious to us. An infant is a totally self-absorbed being, right? We love that in babies, and we care for them just tirelessly and endlessly. A mother and father take care of a newborn baby. But I want to tell you, by the time that baby now is a few years old, we expect that to begin to fade out a little bit. We expect them to begin to think about others instead of just themselves. And by the time that what we should see is by the time that they've matured and grown, they're able to think of others before themselves. They don't think about, that's not the way you're born, but that's the way you mature to think. And I think spiritually that's the case too. As immature Christians, we're self-centered. When we become mature Christians, we begin to think about others. And that's the way it should be. So I think also, and we'll save this here for just a minute. Well, I guess we could go ahead and pick up the last question. Is about 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 8, which you know well, and that's that passage about love that describes the characteristics of genuine love. The King James Version, of course, calls it charity. Other versions will use the word love. And this is the Greek word. I don't know if you remember, several weeks ago on a Sunday night, we just went through this text and just took apart all the characteristics of agape love. Agape love is that high level of love that places the concerns and interests of others above myself. And really, again, that's what this lesson's right about, placing my brother ahead of myself. Well, one of the characteristics, question 7 says, what qualities of character will bring me to place my brother ahead of myself? Well, if I can develop genuine agape love, and the more that I am able to achieve agape love, the more that I will be placing my brother ahead of myself. So humility and real agape love, I think, were my answers to question 7. Anybody else got a thought on that? What character qualities help me put my brother ahead of myself. Can James?
Going back to Romans 12 chapter verse 10, remember it says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. So devotion, it represents a family affection. The affection you have for your blood relative, you should have that similar love and concern, supply their needs.
I think you're exactly right. I really like that word devotion. You know, we should be devoted to one another. And if I'm devoted to you and you disappoint me, I'm not just going to turn my back on you. I'm going to work with you on that. And that's the way we need to be. So devotion is a good word there too, exactly. All right. Well, we're just all but out of time. But again, and question 9 there, the last question on this lesson was about the characteristics of agape love. We don't know a lot of Greek words. We don't have to know a lot of Greek words. But we know the word agape, right, is one of the Greek words translated love in the King James or English versions in general. And we've studied that enough to know that agape love is that self-sacrificial love that puts the concerns and interests and needs of the one I love above myself. So here's this person. I have agape love for this person. Therefore, what they need should be more important to me than what I need. Oh, wow. I got to be humble if I'm going to be that way, right? I've got to think of others instead of self if I'm going to have agape love. Well, that's what it's about. And then, real quickly, question 8. We'll make this the last question then. Is to what extent were Aquila and Priscilla willing to go? To what extent were they willing to go in placing their brother ahead of themselves? Aquila and Priscilla, I've said this plenty of times, they're such honorable, amazing people. We just have snapshot glimpses of them throughout several passages in Scripture. And every one of the snapshots is complimentary to them and the kind of people that they were. And Paul says in Romans 16, verse 3, greet Priscilla and Aquila, my helpers in Christ Jesus, who have for my life laid down their own necks, unto whom not only I give thanks, but also all the churches of the Gentiles. I got to believe that that's not just a figure of speech when he says they laid down their own necks. You know, we have the expression they stuck their neck out. The expression, he sticks his neck out for other people, you know, that has a literal origin. And the idea of someone having their head cut off, or probably maybe the picture you get, you know, you're gonna slaughter some chickens, you got to pull their neck out. You stick your neck out, right? It's in the literal sense, it is the idea of putting your life at risk. And that's, I don't think that's just a figure of speech here in regard to Priscilla and Aquila. I think very likely they had done that very thing. They had stuck their necks out for Paul, put their life at risk. Now, would you be willing to do that for a brother in Christ? Some member of the congregation here at College View. We're not called upon for that sort of thing, are you? It's hard to imagine a situation that might arise wherein I would have to put my physical life at risk in order to serve or help or protect a brother or sister in Christ here in a local congregation. But it was so back in those days. And it is still so in some places in the world. And if we had that kind of, I mean, talk about placing your brother ahead of yourself. Jesus said, greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friend. And that would be the highest measure of love. It would be a great challenge. We're thankful that we don't live in such a day. It could change pretty quickly. We might be in such a time, but we're not now. But it talks to the degree that we should put others above ourselves. Dale? Nathan the prophet put his life at risk to rebuke the king. I think you're right. Jay?
I just think you could put it in terms that we like, I mean, look at what we do for our brethren that would be, or make it look bad. For my sake, inconvenience these
When you think about putting your life at risk for your brother, then the simple little things that we do look pretty insignificant. And yet we push back, we hesitate, we're not willing to do the minor things. All right, good discussion. I don't think we're going to find, as we go through these lessons, I don't think we're going to find new material. I think we're just going to be reminded of challenging things that we need to try to be working at as we live for the Lord. Thanks, everybody.